Good morning. It's Wednesday, November 30th, 2022. Welcome to the Cory Morgan Show. As the name implies, I'm Cory Morgan. Glad to see you there, guys. Today, boy, what a cold one. I'm cheap. I don't like paying for parking too much, so I always park a long ways away from the office and walk here, but starting to reconsider that in some of these temperatures. But I don't know. I was thinking I'll run my leaf blower for some extra time this week. That'll certainly cause some global warming and heat things up for next week, so I'll be more comfortable on my head end. So, yes, we've got, again, for your first time joining, this is a live show, as you can see, and it's great. It comes with bugs now and then, things like that, but the interactivity is fantastic. So make use of the comment scroll, guys. I want to see you in there, chat with each other, send questions, comments my way, send them towards my guests. I read them all. I don't necessarily read them out or, put them to the guests, but I do like seeing it. Again, let's keep it civil. Just, we don't have to be at each other's throats. We can take it seriously without getting on each other's case. Good to see you there, Paradoxy, Patricia out in Chauvin, Pamela out in Monty Lake. Lots of folks coming from all over. It's fun seeing people tuning in from all across the country during these shows. So I got a good one. We've got coming on Tony Bernardo. He's with the Canadian Shooting Sports Association. Of course, with Bill C-21, the federal government is coming after our guns more and more all the time. They're just kind of doing it incrementally this time rather than in one big grab. But the goal is always the same. And I'm certain Mr. Bernardo is going to have some good things to say about that. Of course, we'll have the marketplace check-in and lots and news and ranting and things to cover as well. Boy, busy, of course, the Sovereignty Act. We'll talk a little bit about that later. Danielle Smith, Premier Smith, has stirred up the country. Good to see you there, Jake, Shirley, and Tracy. Yes, a good snowy afternoon indeed. A good time to have an indoor job. I miss the oil field and surveying sometimes, but when the weather's like this, I don't miss it so much. Let's talk about commuting. Let's talk about cold weather. I'm going to get on my rant about an issue. So last May, at 6:21 in the morning on a weekday, 65-year-old Leonard Smith, he stood on an LRT platform waiting for a train to take him to work. Now, Smith has to take the train because he's visually impaired. He's almost blind. Now, suddenly, Smith was attacked by a man who cut his throat from ear to ear with a utility knife. He made a 24-centimeter gash. Doctors told Crane the knife missed his carotid artery by a mere 4 millimeters. And had that artery been cut, Crane surely would have been killed for the crime of being in the wrong place at the wrong time. Now, the man who randomly cut Smith's throat is a violent, chronic offender named Bobby Crane. Crane had been sentenced to 6.5 years of jail time over multiple crimes since 2019. That math doesn't add up well, does it, though? Clearly, he didn't serve that time, as he was free to attempt to murder an elderly, visually impaired man last May. Now, last week in an Alberta court, Judge Harry Van Harten sentenced Crane to 2 years less a day to ensure Crane doesn't have to go to a federal prison. With time served in remand, Crane's going to be on the streets in a little more than a year. I wonder if he'll succeed in killing somebody during his next period of freedom. Van Harten noted that treatment for FASD would serve Crane better than doing prison time. This may indeed be true. Prison does have a way of making dangerous offenders even worse if they aren't treated for whatever their underlying issues are. We should be looking at ways to reform offenders and avoiding prison when possible, and we need to expand our treatment options. But that said, public safety has to come first, and Judge Harry Van Harten has not done so. With an offender as dangerous as Crane, we need to seek treatment options while he is secured. Letting him out is just inviting another random crime against an innocent citizen. And then this is where it gets worse. Justin Van Harten went further than just pointing out how Crane needed FASD treatment. He said that generational trauma from European society is caused to generational trauma European society is caused to Indigenous communities has to be addressed. Really? And we address that by freeing dangerous criminals? If indeed this generational trauma is going on. Where is the judge going with this? And he also said the history of colonialism has to be taken into account. What a load of whoop crap. Crane is 25 years old. He never attended a residential school, and he likely can't even define colonialism. I don't doubt he's had a hard life, and our messed up reserve system has doubtless contributed to that. This doesn't, though, negate the risk that Crane presents to society. We need to examine our entire First Nations system. Absolutely. The reserve system's failing by every measure, and the outdated racist Indian Act should be repealed. That giant ball of wax, though, is not Justin Van Harten's responsibility. Van Harten should have been considering what risk Crane would present if released, rather than dwelling on the broader issues of European influence on modern history. I do hope to be wrong, but I fear it won't be. Crane is going to reoffend violently and soon after being released. They don't just get better after a little while there. He randomly picked out an elderly, handicapped man and tried to murder him through cutting his throat. He's a cowardly, violent man, and he won't be any less so in a year and change from now. I know we need better ways to treat offenders, but until those means of treatment are developed and available, the best way to protect the public from violent people like Bobby Crane remains incarceration. The system's failing to protect us, and woke judges like Van Harten should be held accountable if we're harmed by their refusal to incarcerate dangerous offenders. So yeah, I was just shocked. I mean, as Cliff is saying, yeah, a woke judge, and that's what it is. It's wokeism. Look, you can go in and discuss these things, these issues, these things with how First Nations have been treated historically, the residential schools, things such as that. Fine. But you're a judge. You're there to determine whether or not this man is going to present a risk to society. And I can't see how you could look at a man with a long, violent record already who tried to cut the throat of an old man simply waiting for a train and say, you know what, I think it'll be good for him to be out in 13 months or so. You know what, that friggin' judge should have him billeting at his house. That's what he should do. You think he's safe? Well, how about you use your house as a halfway house? Have him stay there. Maybe have him babysit your grandchildren. How's that work? Because you're putting them loose among the rest of us, Judge. You're asking us to take on the responsibility and risk of a violent person like that. No, this is wrong. This is terribly wrong. And I got a feeling, unfortunately, we're going to hear about Crane again, and it's going to be in the worst kind of way. All right, let's see about some other news and check in with our news editor, Dave Naylor. Hey, Dave, how's it going?
I'm cold, Cory. I'm cold, not going to lie.
It's gross out there.
Yeah, and that story is just another... shows just how dangerous our LRT system is. And we had a story last week, and we updated it yesterday. A guy's firing a flare gun at another guy at an LRT station and who catches fire. And it's no wonder people don't want to ride that thing.
No, it's a war zone on those trains and in those stations. And again, the woke and the city administrators and our judges, unfortunately, just don't want to deal with it.
Yeah. Anyways, I flew out to BC last week on the weekend to a surprise party for my mom for her 80th birthday. So happy birthday, Mom. And she kind of gave me heck. She gave me a slap on the wrist. She said during our interactions last week, I was too focused on missing the soccer game and was too quick. And I did not get the weekly update on things like Duke the Wonder Dog. So for my mom's birthday, can you tell her how Duke the Wonder Dog's doing?
Duke is doing perfectly fine. He's an asshole. He's spoiled rotten. He puts his paws up on the counter to try and catch any crumb that's possibly been missed when I make my lunches in the morning and drives Jane bananas. He wrestles with Volstagg and leaves a mess in the backyard for me to clean. So Duke is living his best life.
Excellent. So there you go, Mom. On to the news, and what a busy morning it has been, Cory. We've got some reaction from Prime Minister Justin Trudeau to Danielle Smith's Sovereignty Act, which was introduced into the legislature yesterday. Trudeau says he doesn't want to pick any fights, and he's not ruling anything out, and he's just going to continue doing all the good work that he has done for Alberta. He's going to continue to do that in the future. So, yeah, we'll see how that works out for him. If you want to go see A Christmas Carol in Edmonton this Christmas season at the Citadel Theatre, you have to wear a mask. The theatre has imposed a mask mandate for anybody that wishes to go there. Former Alberta NDP leader Brian Mason stirred up a bit of a hornet's nest when he compared to the Sovereignty Act to Adolf Hitler and the rise of Nazism in 1933 Germany. So that certainly riled up a few of our readers. And during her evening press conference last night, Premier Smith said she's going to ask for a second medical opinion for a woman called Sheila Lewis. She was the Edmonton woman who was denied a transplant because she refused to be vaccinated. So the Court of Appeal has ruled on the medical side, the doctor's side, against Miss Lewis. So Danielle Smith is going to call in another doctor and to see if he agrees. And our Linda Slobodian's got a great column up today just on just how poorly, how shabbily the Liberal government treated the truckers in the convoy. This is all coming out of the the inquiry, Cory, this or last week, which heard from the Prime Minister, and just some, Linda's not very happy with it. So that's what we've got at the moment. Our Jonathan Bradley is about to give me a story on a Ontario man who's going to choose assisted suicide because of poverty. Says he cannot live in poverty anymore, and there's nobody to help him get out of this mess that he's in. So he's chosen to die. So sad story, and we'll have that up shortly, Cory.
Yeah, well, Linda's column is well worth the read. I mean, everything is, of course, but she really does cut to the issue, especially when she gets a little upset. I understand that sort of writing.
Yeah, she's certainly one of our best.
Absolutely. All right, thanks, Dave. I'll check in with you after the show, see if it warmed up.
Thanks, Cory. I guarantee you it will not.
I know. All right, that is our news editor, Dave Naylor. This is the part of the show where I nag and remind everybody the reason we have all of these stories, all of these columns, all this stuff up, guys, is because we're subscription-based. We got thousands of people who have ponied up. They're helping, and it's $10 a month, $99 for a year. Again, we're talking just same old newspaper subscription type fees. People aren't used to it, but they're becoming more used to it. And what's great about it is it keeps us free from tax dollars. We refuse to take any subsidies. We will not do so. And that makes us accountable to you. So, for all of this news copy and for us to keep on these stories that the mainstream media doesn't even like to cover, make sure to take out a membership. Get on there, westernstandard.news/membership. Sign up, guys. You can get a free trial. Check it out. See if it's worth your while. People, once they sign up, they stick with it. It's a good investment in yourself. So, and thank you to all the people who have already subscribed. So, yeah, a whole lot to unpack. Here's only the problem with going weekly from daily. I noticed one of the commenters was noting that they missed the daily show. I know it kind of burned me out, but at least we could cover a lot of things. And we'll still cover a lot today, but there's just so much to unpack. Looking with Paradoxy and talking about, how we used to have a high ridership in Calgary. Yeah, and it's down. I believe recently in talking, City Hall was talking about that. I think 65% of riders have returned from what it was a few years ago before the pandemic hit. It's down by like 35%. Those trains are nearly empty. People who absolutely have to ride the train or the bus to work or to school, they're still using it. There's still some people who have to. They have no other means. They don't have a driver's license. Expensive to take Uber or taxi everywhere you want to go. But otherwise, the ridership is way down. And the city just seems mystified. They'll never admit to why ridership is so low. Come on, as Dave pointed out, that video that was out there, it was a gang war in the middle of an LRT station. If you haven't seen it already, go back in the archives of the Western Standard and you'll see it. These guys were shooting at each other with a flare gun. They were pulling out sticks and beating on each other. This is stuff we've been reporting on for years. Of course people aren't going to ride that train. And yeah, the worst of the worst was last year when that fella came out and tried to cut the throat of an old man. It was terrible. It was horrible. Now, getting on to some of these woke city management, things like that, Calgary's system is a mess. The people involved with it, one of the ones I love getting after all the time, I shouldn't say I love doing it, but they need to be gotten onto, is Calgary Economic Development, with Mary Moran. They do a terrible job. They've got a big slush fund. They're woke. They hire their political buddies for it. And they don't actually do anything. So there we go. Nico's found the video of that crazy. You can see it in the background. This is in an LRT station in broad daylight, and you can see the blurred people around the edges, but they're all camped out everywhere. When you go into one of these LRT stations now, it's like you've walked into a prison yard. There's rough people, addicts, and they are not peaceful. Some are, but a lot aren't. As you can see with this, the guy's on fire. And we don't know why people won't ride transit. Come on. So what are they doing? They're increasing parking in Calgary by 25%. Yes, Calgary is going to be one of the most expensive places to park in the world. We've got a downtown that's 30% vacant. Yet still, they keep cranking it up. And you know why? They talk about that. They talked about that with Nietzsche. They talk about that back with the Imagine Calgary document and all that crap. Because they want to get you out of your car. They know that nobody's riding a bike. Go downtown right now. We got these bike lanes all over the place. These bike tracks, they take up room. They stole all the street parking. They killed the ground level businesses down there. It's not to facilitate bikes. Nobody's riding bikes down there. Oh, sure, there's a dozen hardcores riding around. It sure looks like they're having fun too, and they're all bundled up and fogged up and sliding all over the place. No, the goal is to push you out of your cars, but it's not working. That's the problem. It's not working. All we're seeing is an expansion out there into the outlying areas, into the suburbs. I mean, it's doing the opposite of these guys who say they want to see a high density downtown. Looks like somebody's looking to find love in our city there. Well, that's good. I mean, it's you get the odd commenters. You know, when we get the spammers popping into the comment scroll, it does mean that we're gathering some traffic and attention, but I would suggest perhaps not checking that one out to find love in your city. I'm going on about ranting about what's in our city right now. And this is happening in all the cities. We're seeing these reports, Vancouver, Ottawa, everywhere. It's happening all over. It's the addiction epidemic. But getting back to things, so I want to get on to Yedlin. She's the head of the Calgary Chamber of Commerce. This person who supposedly is representing businesses. Deborah Yedlin. She used to write the business column in the Calgary Herald. And I don't think she ever owned a business. I'm not sure. They are the chamber of woke. It's just garbage. You read the stuff that they put out. It's crap. They talk about all the diversity and this and that. The main one that got me was back when we got rid of the vaccine passports. Back when restaurants no longer had to force a person to show their medical record in order to sit down and buy a meal. Deborah Yedlin of the Calgary Chamber of Commerce said, when Kenny got rid of those passports, finally, said, this is going to be bad for business. She said, people will not go to restaurants. They will be afraid. This will hurt businesses because they're going to be afraid they're going to get infected without the vaccine passports in place. Yeah, that's how stupid Yedlin is. That's how disconnected from business reality Yedlin is. And this is a person speaking for businesses. Look, the issue isn't whether or not even the passports were effective or not effective. Her job is supposed to be speaking on what is good or bad for businesses. And don't tell me for a second, and I know this, I owned a restaurant and pub for 5 years. I got some experience in this as opposed to Yedlin, that any of those owners were thinking, yes, we want to keep this odious passport that annoys customers, that costs us 30% of the market, that gets our hostess, the people at the front doors harassed and abused by upset people. Yeah, it's good for business. We want to keep it around. Spare me. And what's Yedlin going on about now? Well, she's claiming, she's jumped into the mix with Daniel Smith's Sovereignty Act. She's saying it's going to drive away business. It's going to make Alberta a tougher place to invest. Really? Yedlin. NDP Yedlin. What has made Alberta a difficult place to invest has been a Liberal government that pulls the rug out from under investors halfway through a project. And a Liberal government that shut down the Northern Gateway pipeline. A Liberal government that shut down the oil sands expansions. A Liberal government says we're going to phase out our industries. A Liberal government that says they're going to tax fertilizers to put our farmers out of business. A Liberal government that wants to come and steal the property of Albertans. And steal. Yes, I don't care if it's a buyback. If I haven't put my item up for sale and you're going to take it, it's theft. You don't have my permission to take that. And then to have the head of the Calgary Chamber of Commerce, though, say, oh, the Sovereignty Act is what's going to drive investment out of Alberta. Look, Yedlin, that ship has already sailed. The thing that's driving investment out of Alberta is the man in the Prime Minister's seat in Ottawa and his policies and what he's been doing. The Sovereignty Act, if anything, would show some more stability in saying, yes, we can invest in that province. We can build our infrastructure there because we know we have a government in place that's going to stand up for our interests there and not just capitulate every time Trudeau goes on a whimsical thing saying we want to shut down your business. I mean, the Keystone XL pipeline. If we had a prime minister with a brain, and I'm afraid we don't, he was virtually silent when Biden shut that down. And again, they should be pushing, they should be revitalizing this thing. Biden is going over and begging and groveling to get more Saudi oil, more blood oil, more oil from countries that execute gay people. Meanwhile, Qatar signed a big contract with Germany. You remember when Germany came over, the chancellor, and said, Mr. Trudeau, could you help us? You got a lot of natural gas in Canada and we have an energy crisis coming. Justin said, nah, there's no business case for that. Well, now they've signed a 15-year contract to get liquid natural gas from Qatar. So again, another nation that doesn't respect human rights is going to be making the billions of dollars out of that while Western Canada's clean, ethically sourced natural gas remains shut in. And you have some clown from a Chamber of Commerce like Yedlin saying the problem is our Sovereignty Act. No, the problem is woke clowns like you, Yedlin, who claim to speak for businesses when you have no clue. All right, I'm going to get on to somebody who can speak some common sense in a moment. Our guest is in the lobby. In fact, they are, I may as well be clear, they've been a fantastic sponsor for us. We talk about them every week because we love what they do. Let's run a quick ad for them, and we'll get Tony Bernardo in here and talk about some firearms because there's a lot to talk about.
Canadian Shooting Sports Association. Without the CSSA, our gun rights would have been taken long ago. These guys are on the front lines helping to draft smart and intelligent firearms regulations and legislation in Canada, and more importantly, educating the public about how we keep guns out of the hands of the wrong people. You become a member, it's absolutely worth every penny.
Hey there, Tony. It's good to see you back on the show again. It's been a while. As usual, it's under bad circumstances sometimes.
Well, unfortunately, Cory, but that seems to happen to us a lot these days. That's just something to do with those guys in Ottawa, I think.
I think it does. As you might have caught part of my rant, I'm not typically very happy with them anyways. But I mean, with you guys are national and rightly so, because I mean, there are firearm owners who are having their rights stepped on from coast to coast in Canada. This isn't just a Western issue. This is nationwide. I guess we'll start with it because I mean, the development with C21's a little newer. But first of all, I'd like to talk about you guys have launched a challenge when it comes to that handgun freeze, basically.
Yeah, actually, the challenge is against not just the handgun freeze. The challenge is against all of C21 because, quite frankly, it wasn't written properly. There's a bunch of things that are black letter law in the writing of legislation. You have to do A and B in order to get C, and they have completely messed it up. We think we have decent grounds to declare the legislation null and void, and we're going to pursue that on a technical basis. But also, one of the things they did in there with the handgun legislation was the first thing they did was they reduced our handguns to a value of 0. And they did this because you can't transfer them in any way, shape, or form. So by making them untransferable, they now have a value of exactly 0. And when you pass away, the handguns obviously go to your next of kin, except this time they don't. They go to the federal government, and they don't have to pay compensation because the value is 0. Now, this is absolutely wrong because they were the ones who made the value 0. And in doing so, they trampled all over existing Canadian legislation in this. And that's why we launched the challenge, because these things are worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. In fact, we're looking right now, 1.1 million handguns in Canada. Give an average price of about $1,500 and do the math on that one, and you're quickly over $1 billion. And this is unconscionable that you can take, $1.5 billion of generational wealth that belongs to the citizens of Canada and make it disappear by going poof. That's ridiculous. Who the hell thought that up?
Oh, and firearms, I mean, they're property. They're an investment. I mean, some of them were handed down from people prior to us. Some of us saved our money and we purchased them. I mean, the property right aspect alone, I mean, never mind all the rest of whether this is effective legislation or making anybody safer or any of that. It's our property. And the government, as you said, I mean, it's a roundabout way to, I talked earlier on, I feel it's a theft, even if they compensate you for it. But their way of, okay, we're just going to turn the value to 0. Because as you said, if you can't transfer or sell something, it is de facto 0. Then they'll take it for nothing. It's beyond the pale.
Well, sure. And they're stuck in between a rock and a hard place because there's legislation that's gone through the Supreme Court years and years ago that say that if they're going to take your property, they got to compensate you fair market value for it. Well, these son of a bitches just reduced fair market value to nothing. Like, this is insanity, and we don't think this will withstand a court test. Courts tend to be pretty practical for the most part.
Well, I certainly hope not. I mean, I guess this is something we want to get this resolved as fast as possible, but it's not the same as an immediate illegalization or seizure, so people still can hang on to their property until hopefully when this court challenge goes through and hopefully wins. What sort of timeline are you looking at with that?
Well, you're looking for the challenge probably 1.5 years anyway. Yeah. I mean, there's all kinds of things that could happen. There's many chess pieces moving politically right now on this. Just yesterday, Saskatchewan said they aren't going to play, and they're not going to let the citizens of Saskatchewan play either. So they're not even going to do anything with this stinking legislation, and we're expecting our friends in Alberta will do the same, possibly even New Brunswick, Yukon, and Manitoba. We're still working on Ontario, and we still get a no comment out of the Ontario government. They're still not willing to stick their neck out far enough to say that we should be spending the billions of dollars it will cost to collect all these firearms and actually spend it on crime control.
Well, yeah, I mean, there's again so many levels. I mean, the amount of money being wasted on every level, and kind of move on to the other firearms they're going after too. And we were talking about billions of dollars. I remember making this case a long time ago with the failed registry when they spent $2 billion on that pointless endeavor. How many crimes would have prevented, perhaps, if they'd put $2 billion into substance abuse treatment or mental health treatment or supports, things like that? That's how you prevent crime. That's how you make people safer. Instead, they flushed it away on a $2 billion bureaucracy that served nobody.
That's right. And when questioned under oath, the commissioner of the RCMP, when asked how many crimes has this solved, they said none that they were aware of. I mean, it's just one of these ultra left, woke, ideological things. It's a lot like unicorns and tooth fairies and stuff like that. And they think that because they put a regulation on it, criminals will stop misbehaving. Yeah. I mean, it's just wishful thinking on every part. And you can base your policies on fairy dust and unicorn snot, but quite honestly, it's not going to go anywhere, right? And Canadians are buying into this. This is the part that's so absolutely amazing. The Canadians are buying into this nonsense.
And we have to inform. I mean, it's just the reality. It's okay. The firearms owners are now a minority within the country. But it doesn't mean that they shouldn't have their abilities in that. But it does mean that the majority doesn't necessarily understand what comes with responsible ownership or the mindset. Again, with the vast majority of people never want to hurt a fly. That's not why they got any firearms. Actually, one of my commenters also pointing out, you might have seen that video in a Calgary LRT station. They were shooting each other with a flare gun. Like, criminals will find ways to get dangerous, no matter what laws you put in place against the law abiding.
Yeah, absolutely. And, democracy is not based on the rights of the majority. Democracies are based upon the rights of the minorities. And quite frankly, we expect our governments to protect the rights of minorities. And if we're a minority, that just means we need even more protection than we did before.
Absolutely. And I wrote about it last week as well, because I've always felt it's been the Liberal agenda since Chrétien's days and into today. Yeah. They want to disarm. They want to take every firearm out of every Canadian's hands. And this is just the new move onto it. So rather than the registry route, now they're incrementally doing it through things like C21, and they're taking advantage of tragedies. I mean, the timing's no mistake. Every time they make another grab is just after another tragedy.
Yeah, that's right.
So this time they're going after, they've expanded it in committee, so this won't even get discussed in Parliament, basically hunting rifles.
Right. And when you look back at this, you're absolutely right. The goal is to completely disarm Canadian society. But if the people that they're disarming aren't the ones that are committing the crimes, and they're not, and that all these people produces no positive effect on criminal activity in the country in any way, shape, or form, and it doesn't, you have to ask yourself the big question. Why are they spending so much time and money to do this? Why do they need the public of Canada so effectively helpless?
It's ideological, and I do believe. I mean, an authoritarian is always nervous if the population is able to fight back if they push things too far.
Right, but what do you think they're going to do that's so bad that the Canadian people would rise up against them? I mean, this just, if you think about this, they're doing this for a reason. They're spending billions of dollars over decades to do this. And I don't think it's just because they've been influenced by a Hollywood movie. There's more to it than this. And they're not telling us what it is.
No, and they're failing. I mean, the public, the firearm owners, we don't trust them. They can, recategorize and legalize whatever they like. I suspect, and I won't counsel people to commit crimes, but a whole lot of people are not going to turn in their firearms. That what it will do is turn those people into criminals as far as the law is concerned. I mean, in reality, they're not harming anybody. But
Right.
I can't see wide compliance with this. Not when it comes down to the hunting rifles now.
No, and some of the firearms they've taken are put on the list. Incredibly common firearms, absolutely so common you wouldn't believe it. And some of them, there's like 500,000 examples of one type of firearm, and are all non-restricted. So how do you know where they are? Well, the answer is you don't. And when you're talking about compliance, well, my office is sort of like a hub of what's happening with compliance. I haven't had a single person yet that say, "Oh yeah, I'm going to march right down there and give them my guns." And this compensation thing, this is wishful thinking. Like we put compensation into our lawsuit, not because we expect the government to give us money, but how else do we restore the value of the guns that they've devaluated? If there's a compensatable amount when you perish, at least they're worth something at this point in time. And I think that the average Canadian's hair would stand straight up if they honestly found out how much money we're really talking about. With all the long guns that they've got now added into this and the handguns, we're looking at about a third of the guns in the entire country. And my guess, $8 to $10 billion, billion with a B.
And that's just the buyout. That's not the administration figuring out how to get these things, how to process, how to deal with it. I mean, and that's something to keep reminding Canadians of. Even if you don't have the firearms, even if you don't care if it's taken away from your neighbor, okay, but are you ready to reach into your own pocket to pay for it? Because this is going to cost you.
Well, at this point, I guess it's reaching into your great-grandchildren's pocket, isn't it?
Yeah, there is that. That's kind of a separate discussion altogether. And I mean, I wonder about some of the other hiccups. I mean, this is kind of out of the blue, but have you ever been in communication with some of the First Nations communities? Like somebody had pointed out that apparently a lot of First Nations people use SKSs for hunting. I mean, it's a low-priced, very common actually carbine that people use. It's utilitarian. And that's a tool for their livelihood and survival on those isolated communities. You're going to be taking away something very important to them. And I don't think the government's thinking that through on the problem they'll have going after those.
No, they aren't. And I don't even think they care. That they'll make a policy where they're not going to prosecute it in certain spots, and on other places they will. But mostly it'll be a charge laid as opportunity presents itself to lay the charge. The thing with the SKSs, like I say, 500,000 of them in Canada right now, all non-restricted. I can tell you, honestly, both my kids got their first deer with an SKS. These things are absolutely perfectly acceptable hunting firearms. They work. They always work. They're inexpensive and very, very common. On First Nations, the first thing they banned were the Ruger Minis, the series of mini rifles. And those minis were not banned in the first round of this gun control legislation. And the reason they weren't banned back then, I was around back then and working on the legislation, the reason was because they were so ubiquitous within the First Nations. And they didn't want to get the First Nations all riled up at them. And so they left the minis off the list, even though that was the time when it was still hot and fresh from the Montreal massacre. But now they've gone ahead, banned all the minis and banned all the SKSs. And quite frankly, I think they've got a tiger by the tail on this one. I don't think compliance will be anything.
No, I mean, provinces won't cooperate. Our firearms, chief firearms officer in Alberta, she's fantastic, actually.
Yeah, she is.
Quite outspoken. She's not going to be helping along with this in Saskatchewan and certain other provinces. They don't want to take on this headache. They got better things to do. Well, I mean, all we can do, though, we got to keep fighting back or we will lose. I guess kind of before I let you go, I really appreciate the work you guys are always doing, keeping people up to date. I like reminding people, too, the CSSA you do stuff other than lobbying. I mean, you got all kinds of resources there that a member has as a firearm owner, whether it's videos for, say, firearm operation or different sports or things like that. Maybe let's a little more about your organization before I let you go.
and the best insurance products for firearms owners anywhere in the country. We also insure firearms and hunter safety instructors all over the country, and we have some really fantastic products. We're also offering the only first aid courses that are developed specifically for shooting ranges. Lots of stuff. There's so many things I can't take all this time to say them all, but we're always working hard for our members.
Right. And I just really appreciate the work you do. And again, I just like to remind everybody, it's more than just lobbying. I mean, if you're a firearm owner, that's a resource. As you said, everything from the insurance to safe firearm use. And like anything you take seriously, you should join an association of others and work together. Because if we don't stand up for ourselves together, we're done for.
Well, our track record speaks for itself. In 62 years of existence, we have had exactly 0 fatalities on our shooting ranges.
Yeah, excellent.
So I bet you the police can't say that.
No, you can't have a ski hill claim that.
No, exactly. So we're very, very safe. It reflects in our insurance rates. And, it's a wonderful pastime for those people who've never tried it. They really should get out there and try it. They fall in love with it right away.
Great. Well, thank you very much for joining us today, Tony. And I know you got a lot to do. We'll be keeping an eye on it, and we'll hopefully win this in the long run.
Thank you, Cory.
Great, thanks. So that was Tony Bernardo of the Canadian Shooting Sports Association. Their website is cssa-cila.org. And again, if you just Google that, Canadian Shooting Sports Association, as Pamela Jones-Kenny and the commenters just said there, time for all of us to join the CSSA. It really is time. You got to get in there, guys, and it's standing up for yourself. And there's more to it than the lobbying, all sorts of stuff that's good for you, because it's a great, fun sport. As he pointed out, it's good for young people. It's a good time. I've said the online fights and discussions. I do that. That's Twitter. That's where I go. And of course, one that drives me nuts, you don't need, as soon as they start saying you don't need, you know what? You don't tell me what I need or don't need. All I need is shelter, food, and water. Anything beyond that technically is not a need. And it's not up to you to tell me what I do or don't need. And then people start talking, well, why do you need a semi-automatic? You want to know why with the 22 Plinken gun I have, the semi-automatic, why I need it? Because it's fun. I find it fun to go to the range and play and shoot really fast with my finger at the target. That's all. And I don't have to justify that to you. It's a pastime. It's a harmless pastime. It's a sport. You don't need to go skiing. You don't need to ride a bike. You don't need to own a horse. I don't care. It's not my business to tell you what you need or don't need, nor is it theirs to tell us. We are always on the defensive as firearm owners, and that's part of the problem too. We can't engage them when they start down that line of question. You see, once you have to start trying to justify why you don't need, no, you have to say, it's none of your business what I may or may not need. It's not for you to determine, because once you allow them to start the conversation that way, suddenly you're on the defensive. And you shouldn't, because you haven't done anything wrong. They have to be making the case. We have to turn it onto them. That's part of the point of court challenges, like we're saying. Make them make the case in court. Be proactive. And likewise, when you're debating, if you're debating online or if you're debating with Uncle Louie over Christmas dinner, don't let him take you down the road of having to defend yourself. You don't have to. You never did anything wrong. And it's not up to anybody else to tell you what you do or don't own. Another irony, and people lose that and they forget that all the time too. If you want somebody who gets furious with criminal use of firearms, it's law-abiding firearm owners. Of course we're furious with that. I hate seeing armed robbers out there. I hate seeing people shooting other people out there. I want to see the laws finding ways to crack down on the illegal use of those firearms and be unforgiving for the people who do it. That's what we want to see. We don't want to see, because again, you just want to see more shootings. Oh, come on now. You see, you're not even dealing with a rational person when they start that kind of discussion. But that's what the tone of it is right now. And we got to stop that. But again, we can't defend ourselves. When they say something like that, you don't engage them. Just say you're absurd. You're not worth talking to anymore if you're going to go on that track of discussion. You obviously don't really want to have a conversation about this, because anybody with even a gram of common sense knows that recreational, legal, law-abiding firearm owners are not the ones committing those crimes. And we shouldn't have to defend ourselves for the pastime we enjoy. So don't let them own the narrative, because that's what they're doing. And that's what I was talking about. That's what I was talking about with the Liberals piggyback. And it's disgusting. I think it's really disgusting. Every time there's a tragedy, they use the Nova Scotia tragedy to really bring in that legislation and go after things. Next, they used, of course, that horrible shooting in Texas to go after the firearms and expand their reach. And now they waited until the shooting in a nightclub in Colorado to suddenly throw an amendment into C-21. It's a gross way to make their case. It shows their case is weak. They're playing on emotion rather than logic. I mean, how will any of these legislations stop those sorts of tragedies from happening? They won't. There's much bigger things in society we got to work on if we want to work on it. I want to see mental health supports, because I'll tell you, every person who has done a mass shooting out there has clearly had mental health problems. Nobody sane goes out and murders a whole bunch of their fellow man. We should be proactive. We should be making sure that people, when they are going off the rails, have the supports they need, or perhaps are even incarcerated in a mental health facility, things like that. That's how we can stop these, not by chasing around somebody with a Plinkin 22. We got to change the narrative. Don't let them take it away from us like this. Not just the firearms. Don't let them take the narrative, because they're good at this. And they play the emotions. I mean, we're all emotional. I was horrified when I watched what happened in Texas. Of course I was. You are not human if you didn't look at that and just be mortified. But I want to find out then, how can we stop that? And going after law-abiding firearm owners isn't going to do that. So then if that's not going to do it, then let's look at what will. And as Tony said, $8-9 billion perhaps this could cost. If we have that kind of money laying around, then let's put it into, again, mental health supports. Another area that they use the stats quite often if they talk about firearm deaths, because they do happen, sure. And the ones that do happen among firearms that were either registered law or legally owned, something we don't like talking about is the bulk of those are suicides. And it's tragic, of course it is. But you see, the issue is much deeper than the tool that was used for the suicide. Obviously, we got to find out why that person chose to commit suicide. If a person's determined to end their life, even if you take the firearm away, we are actually fragile beings. They'll find another way. So again, the solution isn't to go after the tool, it's to go after the underlying reason. Why was this person in such a place where they felt they wanted to end their life? That again comes down to investing in mental health, investing in supports, investing in our society in a much bigger way. But targeting the firearms is vacuous, wrong, and it's not going to help us. All right, I've been ranting about that more than I should. No, not more than I should. I'll rant as long as I want on things. But I do want to talk about the Sovereignty Act a bit before we get into the commodity check-in in a bit here, because it's been brought forward. This is one of the areas, and this is really being mischaracterized. As Dave pointed out in the news check-in, Brian Mason, a former NDP MLA, is comparing it to Hitler. So I read the Sovereignty Act. It's pretty boring, a lot of legalese, a lot of stuff in there. There's nowhere in there that allows cabinet to write legislation. It's hard to describe what happens. Everything that will happen through that act has to go through the legislature in a free vote, no less. That means any MLA, theoretically, if the cabinet and premier said, we want to invoke the Sovereignty Act against this, the government's coming in and say the fertilizer bans, things like that. We don't feel it's serving Albertans. We want to make sure that the federal government can't punish our agricultural producers with these. So we're going to invoke the act so we can hinder that and not enforce their laws on the fertilizer. Let's say the majority of the MLAs, even the conservative ones, said, nah, I don't think we need the Sovereignty Act for that. Well, they'd be dead in the water because it's a free vote just to get to that step. And then once that step comes in, what it does is puts it into cabinet. Now, cabinet can, if they've gotten permission from the legislature after that step, then they can start directing, and not non-governmental agencies, they can start directing, though, provincial agencies, things like that, as to what they will or won't enforce or cooperate with. But what the opponents of this act are trying to claim is that it gives the cabinet arbitrary powers to write or bring about legislation. And no, it doesn't. Now, there's already orders in council, which is a problematic area, and provincial and federal governments abuse those. So we start getting a lot too technical when you go into all of these things. But this isn't what some people are portraying it as. It's not the power grab some people think it is. What it is a great big warning shot across the bow of the federal government to say, we're pushing back. And, listening to our clown in chief, Prime Minister Trudeau, here's a quote from him. So he says, anything's on the table in regard to the federal government's response to the new Sovereignty Act, but he's not looking for a fight. Whatever, Justin, the fight's coming to you anyways. If you're going to keep infringing on our provincial jurisdiction, you started the fight. So we're going to push back. And this is another way to do so. And he says, we know the exception. I'm not going to try and imitate his voice. It's just I abuse it badly. And so we know the exceptional powers the premier is choosing to give the Alberta government. No, it's not exceptional. It's all within the Constitution, actually. In bypassing the Alberta legislature, it's not bypassing the legislature, but Justin, you sure love to bypass the truth, you liar. is causing a lot of eyebrows to raise in Alberta, Trudeau said Wednesday. Yeah, so he's buying right into the BS, and just throwing the lies out as well. And he said, we're going to see how this plays out. I'm not going to take anything off the table, but I'm also not looking for a fight. We want to continue to be there to deliver her for Albertans. Blah, 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 Typical Justin Trudeau response. This has got them nervous, though. The battle lines are drawn. This won't be brought in as long as they leave our... sorry, Ashley Ellis saying, just speak moistly, Cory. Yeah, it still gives you the willies, if you remember Trudeau's speech. Sorry, I like sidetracking on a live show. When he was talking about speaking moistly, when he was talking about the reason for masks and everything, it just gave that repugnant vision of his slobber floating through the air, talking towards me as he's moistly speaking. Or, God, either way, face it, Alberta's the punching bag of Confederation. We always have been. The amount of equalization we've poured out, coincidentally, almost always, like 11 billion a year we put out that we don't get back in return in services, happens to be the amount that Quebec takes in. And this is really showing a lot of, again, the broken narrative, the hypocrisy of our Confederation. Because nothing in here is beyond what anything that Quebec's ever done or will do or says they'll do. Nothing. But when Albertans do it, we're assholes. When Quebec does it, it's their right. The fact that there is that dissonance, that hypocrisy, that unfairness shows why provinces have to stand up for themselves within the Confederation. Provinces, if you read the Constitution, if you want some dry reading, but it's worth reading, and the BNA Act and things such as that, we're actually quite powerful. We have a lot of abilities, but we have to exercise them. We've let the federal government usurp a lot of our authority. And what Daniel Smith's doing is bringing about the means to take that authority back. And people are saying it's a move towards separatism. Look, I've been supporting Alberta independence for a long, long time. People might remember my failed formation of the Alberta Independence Party back when I was 29 years old and ran against Ralph Klein and had our butts handed to us in that election. I'm very familiar with this turf. And if anything, this will defer independence movements. This will slow them down. Doing nothing is what will bring about more independence movements. Just letting the government keep walking all over us. That's how you flourish and bring about an independence movement. If what Smith is doing works, it will actually reduce independence sentiment. Quite the contrary. And I'm saying that as a person who supports independence. If anything, it's slowing what I'd like to see eventually, because I want to see the whole Constitution rewritten, and I don't think anything less than independence will do that. But in the meantime, we're quite a ways from it. And the CBC walked out of the media forum and stated Smith was making up her legislation, according to Chris Gibson. Can we take him to court for slander? I don't know. The CBC, I just want to see them defunded. I mean, they're a bunch of Marxists doing what their bosses tell them. It's a gross Pravda organization fully funded by your tax dollars. Not only that, they steal advertising dollars from the private market because they can undercut other advertisers. The only thing is nobody watches them. I mean, very, very few. It's a garbage organization, and I do look forward to its demise. It's another area where we certainly could use a departure from our federal control on things. So let's watch this act unfold. And I mean, again, people can debate whether it needs to be done or doesn't need to be done. But in reading it, and I read it, like I said, I read the actual act today. It's not that long. There's a whole lot of legalese in it. It's pretty boring. But there's nothing in there giving extraordinary powers to the cabinet. There's nothing in there that clashes with the Constitution. Most of it is just that the strongest thing is the language around the act going into it. It's pushing back and saying we want to use it to give a backhand to the federal government if they step on our authority. But there's nothing I could find in it to interpret the haywire stuff that people are claiming is within it. It shows quite a bit, though, when we had a prime minister who, again, on 50% of the days, he puts his shoes on the wrong feet, and he managed to impose the Emergencies Act upon Canadians, and the mainstream media has no issue with this, apparently, and felt it was a justified move. They can entrust him with that power and that ability to suspend our rights in what he determines to be an emergency. But when we want to bring in something like the Sovereignty Act, or I shouldn't say we necessarily, I don't have a membership, but I'm an Albertan. Suddenly we're extreme. Suddenly we're pushing it too far. Suddenly we're threatening Confederation. I tell you, people, this is what protects Confederation. And it's funny. I'm watching people like Don Braid, who's a columnist who, I've got nothing but respect for Braid. He's been there a long time and he knows his stuff. But boy, he's just got a chip on his shoulder for Smith. And he's talking about basically whether or not the federal government will override. They have an ability. The federal government can disallow this legislation. They can come in. There's a kind of an obscure clause where they can say, no, we're going to override that and not allow it to happen. Again, if you want to see an independence movement explode, have the federal government step in and tell us we're not allowed to have that act. Well, Quebec does all the same things. We'll see. Interesting times, if nothing else, and that's just day one of the legislative session. Okay, let's get on to talking actually about, again, people working for a living, paying those bills and being out there, and that is our weekly check-in with Jim Buzicum of Marketplace Commodities. Good to see you, Jim.
Hi, Cory. How are you doing today?
I'm pretty good. I'm ranting and raving. People sometimes mistake it for anger, but that's just my nature, actually. I just feel better that way. If I'm quiet, you got to worry.
Well, there's lots to rant and rave about. I get it.
There is, but I won't pull you into that. We're talking about more important things to at least more immediately for people, and that's working in agriculture and trying to plan and plant and market your products, I guess, as efficiently as possible. How are things looking on the agricultural commodity front today?
Yeah, so cash markets are quiet right now with buyers and sellers. They somewhat go into hibernation mode between U.S. Thanksgiving and winter. That's 20, 30-day time period. A lot of buyers have their purchases figured out. A lot of sellers, they like to plan things out around grain movement, around cash flow, things like that. So it's a little bit quieter that way. Some action that we have seen in the cash markets are buyers and sellers both talking about new crop. So we're talking about 2023 sales. So executing those sales following August, September into next year. And we think that's good. It's nice to see, both sides that are being proactive, looking at forward contracting into another marketing year. Those options are available to farmers. They can go out as much as a year and a half in advance on selling their commodities.
Yeah, well, that's the challenge, I guess, with agricultural producers. You really have to look at that long game, right? I mean, you're planning what you're going to seed, I imagine, at this point, and that's with the goal of marketing that, almost a year from now. So some bad decisions can really impact you terribly if you aren't reading the winds right, I guess.
Yeah, that's right. So they can look at planning out what they're seeding. They can plan out and purchase already like their production, like so their inputs such as fertilizer, seed, chemical, those type of things. So in turn, if they go out there and they sell those commodities for the fall and winter of next year, 2023, hopefully they can lock in a profit. We'd like to think they are. The commodity prices are at record levels. Now, of course, inputs are very high as well. So expenses are very high. So it's good that they're doing that. Now, there's always just a very small percentage that start at that. We just want to remind farmers when they do that, just make sure that they're aware of the contract risk. So forward contracting does involve some more risk. I mean, they're not production contracts, they're actual fixed price, actual tonnage contracts. So you have to produce it and you can't control the weather. You can only control the things you can control, such as production, like your inputs and things like that. So
yeah, and then some of those inputs, I guess, aside from what commodities you might be choosing to produce or what levels, I mean, it's kind of beyond a producer's control, but you want to plan for it. I mean, the two big ones, I guess, right now are fertilizer and diesel. Those are really impacting production costs in general.
yeah, exactly. So fertilizer costs have stabilized somewhat, and so have diesel prices, and we've seen crude oil back off a little bit, but I believe the outlook on both those things are actually quite bullish, along with the commodity markets being quite steady. So yeah, there's a lot of moving pieces at the farm gate to try and manage all these parts, and the more that they're on it, probably the more chance that they're going to be profitable. So
Yeah, well, and you're, I guess, in the break period. This is when you're viewing things. It gives you a bit of a breather to start with processing data and figuring out where things should be going for your clients at this point.
That's correct. Yeah. So just some other areas that I just want to comment on. The outside markets are still showing some healthy volatility. So what I mean by that is the futures derivatives market. Canola dropped in the last week down to as low as $800 per metric ton. Now it's back up. This week's actually having a nice bounce, up about $40 per ton. Corn, wheat markets chattering around, more or less flat. Canadian dollar is interesting though. Over the last week, we've seen it move to as low as 73 and change, like I think it was 73.10 or 73.20. It's now back up to about 74.10, 74.15. Last week we talked about some of the geopolitical issues that are still there. We can now add China into that mix with China's zero COVID policy and millions locked down in China. Of course, a big exporter, big importer. Still have the issues in Brazil, still have the war in Russia and Ukraine. So these are all geopolitical issues that will continue to affect marketing here in Canada.
I guess a little bit out of left field. I'm wondering, we've seen news about, I know there was a lot of disruptions in the Netherlands last year, and there's talk now about some farms being bought out. That would be quite a local issue going on there, but are they a large enough producer that would impact, I guess, more of the world markets in any way?
Yeah, I don't see any issues in Canada because of what's going on in Netherlands. I think the Dutch farmers, their protests didn't really seem to affect markets or anything like that. I would expect that it would have affected their local economy. They're more on a localized basis. But other than that, we haven't seen too much of effect. Other than some of these other places, such as Brazil, some of the Chinese ports, if workers are unable to get to and from their job sites, that's a much bigger issue.
Yeah, well, those countries, Brazil is one everybody forgets about. They're massive and it produces a lot of everything. We just don't hear enough about that country in the news sometimes.
Yeah. No, the South American markets are massive markets, especially with corn and soybeans, but they're starting to be even more so on other commodities as well, even wheat producing. Of course, beef is huge in Brazil as well. So, we definitely have some similarities here, and we definitely need to keep an eye on it.
Well, it's certainly a world market these days, so a person has to keep an eye on everything. But that's your job out there. So I appreciate the check-in this week, Jim, and we'll talk to you again next week.
All right. Thanks, Cory. Have a good day.
Good, thanks.
Bye.
So that was Jim Buzicum of Marketplace Commodities. Guys, if you're an ag producer, again, they provide those services. He watches all those things and helps, counsel and aid with agriculture production so you can maximize what you're doing. Check them out, marketplacecommodities.com. I think their main office is in Lethbridge, and they've got offices throughout the West and other areas and that. So yeah, we're getting near the end of things. I want to wrap up with speaking on a business line, but in a different sense. So Dave mentioned that with this Citadel Theater up in Edmonton, and they're going to play the Christmas Carol on December 10th. And they're saying, though it's masked only, you have to wear a mask in the audience if you're going to watch. I guess the performers won't be masked, but if you want to attend, you have to wear a mask. You know what? I have no problem with this. So I'll just choose not to go. And this is an interesting experiment. By all means, maybe you've got enough people who want to sit in a masked room full of a bunch of other masked people and take in a play. Good for you. And if it works, great, go for it. If it doesn't, don't. So, a lot of people are getting a little wound up with this, but you see, that's a choice of that theater group and that bunch and doing whatever they want. That's between them and the patrons of their theater. It's when we have legislation that we have a problem. And, there's some people who they're obsessed. They're almost religious with masking. They want us to mask. It seems in perpetuity. At the drop of every hat, they're calling for more mask mandates. That's where the problem is. So, as Jet Corrigan saying, used to love the Citadel, but I don't do breathing obstruction. See, and that's her choice. Maybe people will choose to go there. Maybe they won't. But that's up to them. I don't care. Go ahead. You can have a rule in your private business saying everybody coming in has to wear a ball gag. I think there's probably some specialty bars that have that in the back rooms. Your business. If you don't want to wear it, don't go there. Likewise with the theater and things like that. Another big one. So we're going to be talking. I'm kind of wrapping things up The pipeline, we're going to have that running tonight at 7 o'clock as usual with Nigel and Derek Fildebrand and myself. And a big issue that's coming in this, there's just so much to cover. As I said, I'm almost tempted to go back to a daily show, but I'm not. But the Métis Settlement Council and the federal government are talking about setting aside potentially a whole bunch of Alberta land, which would take it out of energy production. And this could be a massive hornet's nest coming about. It would really impact Alberta's ability to produce, and it would also set a precedent to them coming in and shutting down our lands under our feet, which could be the very first big challenge for the Sovereignty Act. Perhaps there's a lot of things we could challenge on. It could be the firearms and things like that. So, all right, I think that kind of covers it today, guys. Jason Kenney resigned yesterday. I don't know. Yeah, Dave noted that in the news update too. I guess he just kind of wanted to give one other little middle finger and chose to throw in speech to do it. Whatever. I appreciate the work Mr. Kenney has done over the years as a member of parliament, and I appreciate what he did in bringing the UCP into power. I just wish he could have left with a little more dignity, but that's just the way it goes. So thanks for tuning in today, guys. Try to stay warm out there. Always be thankful. Remember, it is fossil fuel keeping you warm today, not windmills. Remind your legislators of that. Good to see you all, and I will talk to you all again next week at the same time.